The grand hall of the Galactic Concord shimmered with light from 1,000 floating crystals that drifted near the ceiling like captured stars. And Commander Uravel of the Thesari Dominion stood near one of the tall windows, watching the other species mingle and laugh, and pretend to enjoy each other's company. She hated these events. Her violet skin caught the light and reflected it back in soft waves, and her 4 eyes moved constantly across the room, tracking every movement, every gesture, every potential threat, because that was what she had been trained to do since she was young enough to hold a blade. The Thesari were warriors, and they had been warriors for 10,000 years before most of these species had learned to make fire. Uravel wore her formal military uniform, the dark fabric decorated with silver symbols that told the story of her victories, her rank, her family line, and the enemies she had defeated in single combat. And at her hip hung the ceremonial blade that every Thesari commander carried, a weapon that was both a tool and a symbol of everything her people believed in. She was not here because she wanted to be. She was here because the Thesari High Council had ordered her to represent their interests at this gathering, and because refusing a direct order was not something a commander did. No matter how much she might want to, the Galactic Concord was celebrating its newest member species tonight. The humans Uravel had studied them, as she studied all potential enemies and allies. And she had not been impressed by what she found in the reports and data files that crossed her desk. They were a young species, barely 300 years into space travel, which was nothing compared to the Zeri's 15,000 years among the stars. And they were soft-bodied creatures with only 2 eyes and fragile bones that broke easily under pressure. They lived short lives, rarely more than a century, and they spent much of that time on strange emotional pursuits that seemed to have no practical purpose. They made art and music and told stories to each other, and they formed intense bonds with single partners and with their offspring. And they seemed to think that these things mattered more than strength or conquest or glory. Uravel did not understand them, and she did not particularly want to understand them. She wanted to finish her drink, make the required number of polite conversations, and return to her ship where things made sense. But then the human ambassador walked toward her, and everything changed. His name was Marcus Cole, and he was an older human male with brown skin and gray hair at his temples and lines on his face that Uravel had learned indicated age among his kind. He moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence that surprised her, nodding to other delegates, shaking hands in that strange human greeting ritual, and smiling at everyone he passed. When he reached her, he stopped and looked up at her with his 2 small eyes, and Uravel was struck by how calm he seemed, how unafraid, even though she stood a full head taller than him and could have snapped his neck with one hand. "Commander Uravel," he said, and his voice was warm and friendly in a way that made her suspicious. "I have heard so much about your victories in the Periphery Wars, and I have to say that it is truly an honor to meet you in person." He extended his hand toward her in that human greeting gesture. She did not take it. "You have heard propaganda," she said, keeping her voice flat and cold. "Nothing more than stories designed to make the Thesari seem more impressive than we are." She expected him to be offended, or at least uncomfortable, but instead he simply smiled again and lowered his hand without any sign of anger or hurt feelings. "Perhaps you're right," he said, "but I would love to hear the truth from you directly, if you would ever be willing to share it with me, because I think the real story is probably more interesting than any propaganda could be." Uravel studied him with all 4 of her eyes, trying to understand what he wanted from her, what angle he was playing, what advantage he hoped to gain from this conversation. She found nothing. He seemed to be exactly what he appeared to be, a friendly older human who genuinely wanted to talk to her. It was deeply unsettling. "You are strange," she said finally. Most species are afraid to approach a Thesari commander without a good reason. Well, he said, and that smile appeared on his face again. I suppose I do have a reason, even if it is not a very practical one. And what reason is that? He was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that Uravel could not quite identify. A softness that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. You remind me of my daughter, he said. The words hit Uravel like a physical blow around them. Conversations began to quiet as other Thesari delegates turned to look, their spines rising in the instinctive threat response that all their kind shared. Uravel felt her own spines begin to extend along her back and arms, felt the heat of anger rising in her chest, felt her hand drift toward the blade at her hip. What did you say to me? She asked, and her voice had gone very quiet and very dangerous. The human seemed confused by her reaction, his small eyes widening slightly, his head tilting to one side in a gesture that might have been curiosity or concern. I said you remind me of my daughter, he repeated, as if he did not understand why those words had caused such a reaction. I meant it as a compliment, Uravel said. And now the entire hall had gone silent. Every eye and sensor and sensory organ turned toward them. You compare a commander of the Third Fleet, a warrior who has led armies and conquered worlds, to a child, and you call this a compliment. She took a step toward him, and to his credit, he did not back away, though she could see the pulse jumping in his throat, could smell the slight change in his scent that indicated fear among my people. She said, there is no greater insult than to compare a warrior to a juvenile, because it implies weakness and incompetence and a fundamental failure to become what one should be. And wars have been fought over less than what you have just said to me. The human ambassador opened his mouth to speak, but Uravel cut him off with a sharp gesture. You will have the opportunity to explain yourself, she said, or to retract your words, or to face the consequences of your insult. But you will do so in private, where your humiliation will not become a diplomatic incident that drags both our species into conflict. She turned and walked toward one of the private alcoves that lined the edges of the great hall. And after a moment, she heard the human's footsteps following behind her, whatever happened next. Uravel knew that this night had just become far more complicated than she had ever expected it to be. The private alcove was small and quiet, separated from the main hall by a curtain of shimmering energy that blocked both sound and light. And Uravel stood with her back to the human for a long moment, trying to control the rage that burned inside her chest like a dying star. She had killed beings for less than what he had said to her in the old days, before the Thesari had joined the Galactic Concord and agreed to follow its rules about diplomatic conduct. She would have simply drawn her blade and ended him right there in the Great Hall, and no one would have questioned her right to do so. But these were not the old days, and the Concord had rules, and breaking those rules would bring consequences that would fall not just on her, but on her entire species. So she stood there and breathed and waited for the red haze of anger to fade enough that she could think clearly behind her. She heard the human shift his weight from one foot to the other, a nervous gesture that told her he was finally beginning to understand how much danger he was in. Good. Let him be afraid, Commander, he said, and his voice was quiet and careful. I think there has been a serious misunderstanding, and I would very much like the chance to explain myself before anything happens that cannot be. Taken back, Uravel turned to face him, and she let him see the full force of her anger in the way her spine stood rigid along her arms and back, in the way her four eyes focused on him with predatory intensity, in the way her hand rested on the hilt of her blade. You have one chance, she said. Choose your words carefully, human, because they may be the last words you ever speak. Marcus Cole swallowed hard, and she could see the fear in him now. Could see it in the way his hands trembled slightly and the way sweat appeared on his forehead. But he did not run, and he did not beg, and some small part of her respected him for that. "Among my people," he began, and his voice was steadier than she expected. "Comparing someone to your child is not an insult, and it is not meant to suggest that they are weak or immature or incomplete." "Then what does it mean?" Uravel demanded. "Because among my people, children are unfinished beings. Potential that has not yet been realized, and to compare an adult to a child is to say that they have failed to grow into what they should have become." "I understand," the human said, nodding slowly, "and I can see now why my words cause such offense. And I am truly sorry for the pain I have caused you. But please believe me when I say that I meant something very different." He took a breath, and something changed in his face. A shadow passing over his features that Uravel did not recognize at first. "Humans love their children," he said. "We love them more than we love ourselves, more than we love our careers or our achievements or our own survival. And when we say that someone reminds us of our child, we are saying that this person carries something precious inside them, something worth protecting, something worth dying for." Uravel felt her spines begin to lower slightly, not because her anger had faded, but because she was genuinely confused by what he was telling her. "You are saying that comparing me to a child is a way of saying you would die for me?" she asked. "That makes no sense. It does to humans," Marcus said. And that shadow was still there in his eyes, darker now. "Because our children are the best of us, Commander. They are everything we hope to be and everything we wish we could have been. And when we see those qualities in another person, when we see that same fire and courage and determination, it moves something inside us that is very hard to explain." He paused, and Uravel saw him struggle with something, some emotion that he was trying to keep contained. "My daughter was brave," he said finally, and his voice had gone rough and uneven. "She was stubborn and brilliant, and she never backed down from a fight that she believed in. Even when the odds were against her, even when everyone told her she was wrong, even when it cost her everything." "Your daughter," Uravel said, and she noticed that he had used the past tense, the grammatical form that indicated something that was no longer true. "Elena," the human said, and the name seemed to cause him physical pain. Her name was Elena, and she died 3 years ago on Titan Station when the reactor failed, and she stayed behind to make sure everyone else got out. Uravel felt something shift inside her, something she did not expect and did not entirely understand. The human was grieving. She recognized it now, that shadow in his eyes, that roughness in his voice, because she had seen it in her own warriors when they lost comrades in battle. That hollow emptiness that never quite went away no matter how much time passed. "She was not a soldier," Marcus continued. "She was a peacekeeper, a civilian who tried to help people and keep them safe. But when the emergency came, she acted like the bravest warrior I have ever known. And she saved 400 people before the section she was in decompressed and took her into the void." He looked up at Uravel, and there were tears in his eyes now. That strange human water that they produced when they were experiencing strong emotions. "Yesterday," he said, "I watched you stand before the entire Concord and argue against the exploitation of the Rim colonies. And I watched you refuse to back down, even when 12 senior delegates tried to intimidate you into silence. And I saw her, Commander. I saw my daughter in the way you stood, and the way you spoke, and the way you refused to bend." Uravel said nothing, because she did not know what to say. "When I told you that you remind me of my daughter," Marcus said, "I was not calling you a child, and I was not suggesting that you are weak or incomplete. I was saying that you carry the same fire that she carried, the same courage, the same refusal to accept injustice, even when it would be easier to look away." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture that seemed almost childlike in its simplicity. I was saying that you are worthy of the love I gave to her, he said. And among humans, there is no higher compliment that one person can give to another. The alcove was very quiet. Uravel stood there, her hands still resting on her blade, her spines now completely flat against her skin. And she looked at this small, fragile human who had just opened his heart to her and shown her his deepest wound. She had been prepared for many things when she entered this alcove. She had been prepared for lies and excuses and desperate attempts to escape punishment. She had not been prepared for this. I need to think, she said finally. And her voice sounded strange to her own ears, softer than she intended. This is not something I can process quickly. I understand, Marcus said. And he seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. Take all the time you need, Commander. I will be here whenever you are ready to talk. He turned and walked toward the energy curtain that separated them from the main hall. And then he stopped and looked back at her over his shoulder. For what it is worth, he said, I think Elena would have liked you, and I think you would have liked her. And that thought brings me more comfort than you can possibly imagine. Then he was gone, and Uravel was alone with her thoughts and the strange new feeling that was growing inside her chest. A feeling that she did not have a name for in any language she knew. Uravel did not return to the reception that night. Instead, she went back to her ship, the Zazari warship Blade of Morning that hung in orbit above the Concord station. And she locked herself in her private quarters and sat in the darkness for a very long time. The face of the human ambassador kept appearing in her mind, that strange mixture of grief and hope in his small eyes. The way his voice had broken when he spoke his daughter's name. The tears that had fallen down his cheeks without shame. She had seen warriors cry before, but only in private, only when they thought no one was watching. Because among the Thesari, showing such emotion in front of others was considered a sign of weakness. A crack in the armor that every warrior was expected to maintain. Marcus Cole had cried in front of her. A stranger, an alien, someone who had been moments away from killing him, and he had not seemed ashamed. Uravel pulled up everything her ship's computer had on human culture and began to read. Something she should have done more thoroughly before attending the reception. And what she found surprised her. Humans were indeed short-lived creatures. Their bodies fragile and their lifespans brief compared to most spacefaring species. But they did not seem to view this as a weakness. Instead, they seemed to view it as a reason to love more fiercely, to hold on more tightly, to make every moment count because they knew how few moments they had. They formed pair bonds that often lasted their entire lives. And they invested enormous amounts of time and energy into raising their offspring. And they grieved openly and deeply when they lost the ones they loved. Other species found this strange and inefficient. Uravel was beginning to think that other species had missed something important. She read about human history, about the wars they had fought among themselves before they reached the stars. Terrible conflicts that had killed millions upon millions of their kind. And she expected to find a species that had been hardened by all that death into something cold and practical. What she found instead was a species that kept trying to be better every time they fell into darkness. They pulled themselves back out again, and they built monuments to remind themselves of what they had lost. And they told stories to their children about why they must never let such things happen again. They carried their dead with them. Not as a burden, but as a guide. Uravel thought about Elena Cole, the daughter of the ambassador, a civilian peacekeeper who had given her life to save 400 strangers when she could have run to safety herself among the Thesari. Such a death would have been honored. But the focus would have been on the tactical value of the sacrifice, the number of lives saved, the strategic advantage gained. Humans seemed to focus on something else entirely. They focused on the love that had made such a sacrifice possible. Uravel turned off her computer and sat in the darkness again. And she thought about her own people, and the way they raised their children, the Sari young were trained from the moment they could walk, pushed and tested and challenged until only the strongest remained, and those who could not meet the standards were cast aside without sentiment. It was efficient. It produced the finest warriors in the galaxy, but it did not produce the kind of love that Marcus Cole had shown for his daughter, the kind of love that could still bring tears to his eyes 3 years after her death, the kind of love that made him see her face in the face of a stranger who shared her spirit. Uravel wondered what it would feel like to be loved like that. She had been respected and feared and admired throughout her long career, but she could not think of a single person who would weep for her if she died, who would see her in the faces of strangers and feel moved to speak of her. The thought should not have bothered her. A warrior did not need such things. But sitting there in the darkness of her quarters, thinking about a human girl named Elena who had died saving strangers, Uravel found that it bothered her very much indeed. The next morning, she sent a message to the human delegation requesting a private meeting with Ambassador Cole. She told herself it was to properly resolve the diplomatic situation. She told herself it was her duty as a representative of the Dasari Dominion. She told herself many things, but deep down she knew that she simply wanted to understand, to learn more about this strange species that loved so deeply and carried their dead so close to their hearts. Marcus Cole agreed to meet her in one of the station's observation lounges, a quiet space with large windows that looked out on the stars. When Uravel arrived, she found him standing at one of the windows, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on something far away that she could not see. "Commander," he said, without turning around. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me again. I was not sure you would." "I was not sure either," she admitted, coming to stand beside him at the window. "Your words last night caused me great confusion, and I spent many hours trying to understand them." "And did you succeed?" he asked, finally turning to look at her. "I am not certain," she said, "but I believe I understand more than I did before. And I find that I have questions, many questions. If you are willing to answer them." The human smiled, and it was a different smile than the one he had worn at the reception. Softer and sadder and somehow more real. "Ask me anything," he said. "I have nothing to hide from you." "Commander." Uravel was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. And then she asked the question that had been burning inside her since the night before. "Your daughter," she said. "Tell me about her, not how she died, but how she lived, what kind of person she was, what made her laugh, what made her angry, what she dreamed about when she looked at the stars." Marcus Cole's eyes grew bright with tears again, but he was smiling, a real smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "You want to know about Elena," he said, and his voice was full of wonder and gratitude. "I want to understand," Uravel said. "I want to understand what it means to love someone the way you loved her. And I think the only way to do that is to know who she was." The human turned back to the window, but he was not looking at the stars anymore. He was looking at something inside himself, at memories that were precious and painful all at once. "Elena was stubborn," he said, and he laughed softly. "Oh God, she was so stubborn. She used to argue with me about everything, politics and philosophy, and what to have for dinner. And she never backed down even when she knew she was wrong." Uravel listened as he talked, and the picture that formed in her mind was of a young human woman who burned with life, who cared deeply about justice and fairness, who could not stand to see anyone being treated badly, who laughed loudly and loved fiercely and never did anything halfway. "She sounds like a warrior," Uravel said when he paused. "She was," Marcus agreed. "Just not the kind who carries a weapon. She fought with words and ideas and sheer determination. And she won more battles that way than I ever won in a boardroom. He turned to face Uravel again, and there was something in his expression that she had not seen before. A kind of peace that seemed to have settled over him. "Thank you for asking," he said. "Most people do not want to hear about her. They think it will make me sad. But talking about her makes me feel like she is still here somehow. Still fighting the good fight." Uravel nodded slowly, understanding something that she had not understood before. "You carry her with you," she said. "Not as a weight, but as a light," Marcus smiled. And the tears were falling freely now, but he did not seem to mind. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what it feels like, Commander. You understand better than you know." Over the following days, Uravel found herself seeking out Marcus Cole's company more and more often. And each conversation taught her something new about humanity that she had never expected to learn. They talked about family and duty and honor and love. And Uravel discovered that humans and the Sari were not as different as she had always believed. They simply expressed the same fundamental needs in different ways. The Sari valued strength because strength meant survival. And survival meant the continuation of everything they held dear. Humans valued love because love gave them the strength to survive. And survival without love seemed meaningless to them. It was the same mountain viewed from two different sides. One afternoon they were walking through one of the station's garden sections, a place where plants from 100 different worlds grew in carefully maintained environments. And Marcus stopped in front of a small tree with silver leaves that shimmered in the artificial light. "This is from Earth," he said. "We call it a weeping willow, although this is a modified version that can survive in space. And there is one just like it in the memorial garden where Elena's name is inscribed." Uravel studied the tree, noting the way its branches hung down toward the ground like cascading water. And she thought it was beautiful in a sad and gentle way that she had not expected to appreciate. "Why do you build memorial gardens?" she asked. "What purpose does it serve to have a place dedicated to those who are gone?" Marcus reached out and touched one of the silver leaves, and his expression was thoughtful and far away. "We build them so we do not forget," he said, "so that future generations will know the names of those who came before. So that the sacrifices of the past are not lost to time. The Thesari have something similar," Uravel said, surprising herself. "We inscribe the names of our greatest warriors on the walls of the Temple of Ancestors, and we tell their stories to the young so that their deeds will never be forgotten." "You see," Marcus said, turning to smile at her, "we are not so different after all." Uravel considered this for a moment. And then she said something that she had been thinking about for several days. "I would like to add your daughter's name to my personal chronicles," she said. "It is an honor that the Sari commanders reserve for warriors of exceptional valor, regardless of what species they belong to." Marcus stared at her, and for a long moment he seemed unable to speak, his eyes wide with an emotion that Uravel had learned to recognize as deep and overwhelming gratitude. "You would do that?" he asked, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "You would honor my daughter as one of your own warriors. She died saving others," Uravel said simply. "She stood against fear and death and did not flinch. She gave her life so that strangers might live, and among my people. There is no greater act of courage than that." Marcus turned away from her, and she saw his shoulders shake as the tears came. But this time, she did not think of them as weakness. She thought of them as a form of prayer. "Thank you," he said when he could speak again. "You cannot know what this means to me. To know that she will be remembered not just by humans, but by the Thesari, by a people who have lived among the stars for 15,000 years. She deserves to be remembered," Uravel said. And she was surprised to find that she meant it with her whole heart. "And I think she would have made an excellent Thesari, if she had been born among my people instead of yours." Marcus laughed at that. a real laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "She would have driven your High Council absolutely crazy," he said. "She never could follow rules that she thought were unjust. Then she definitely would have made an excellent Dasari," Uravel said. And she found that she was smiling too. They stood together in the garden for a long time after that, not speaking, just existing in the same space and feeling the strange new bond that had formed between them. Uravel thought about what it meant to carry someone in your heart the way Marcus carried Elena. To love someone so completely that they became part of you even after they were gone. She had always believed that such attachments were dangerous, that they created weaknesses that enemies could exploit, that a true warrior should stand alone and need nothing but their own strength. But watching Marcus Cole, seeing the way his love for his daughter had shaped him into someone kind and brave and determined to make the universe a little better, she began to wonder if she had been wrong. Perhaps love was not a weakness at all. Perhaps it was a different kind of strength, one that the Dasari had forgotten how to use in their pursuit of martial perfection. The thought stayed with her as they left the garden and went their separate ways. And it was still there that night when she lay in her quarters and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to her. She was changing. She realized the encounter with Marcus Cole had cracked something open inside her that she had not even known was there. And now strange new feelings were pouring through the cracks like water through a broken dam. She was not sure if she was becoming stronger or weaker, and she was not sure if it mattered anymore. All she knew was that she had spent her entire life believing that she understood what it meant to be a warrior. And now a small, fragile human had shown her that there was so much more to learn. The next day, she sent a formal request to the Dasari High Council, asking for permission to extend her diplomatic mission indefinitely so that she could continue her work with the human delegation. The council was surprised, but they approved her request. They did not understand why their most decorated commander suddenly wanted to spend time with a young and insignificant species like humans. They did not understand that Uravel had found something precious among these strange creatures, something that she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. She had found a new way to be strong, and she was not ready to let it go. 6 months passed, and Uravel became known throughout the Galactic Concord as humanity's most unexpected ally. She spoke for them in council meetings when other species tried to dismiss their concerns. She defended their right to be heard when older civilizations attempted to silence them. And she became a bridge between two peoples who had nothing in common except a shared capacity for courage. The other Dasari did not understand her transformation, and some of them whispered that she had grown soft, that her time among humans had weakened her warrior spirit. Uravel did not care what they whispered. She knew what she had found, and she knew what it was worth on the anniversary of Elena Cole's death. Marcus asked Uravel to accompany him to Earth, to visit the memorial garden where his daughter's name was inscribed, and she agreed without hesitation. The journey took 3 days by human transport, and during that time they talked about everything and nothing, about politics and philosophy and the nature of courage, about memories and grief and the strange ways that loss could bring people together. When they finally arrived at the garden, Uravel was struck by how beautiful it was. The weeping willows that Marcus had told her about lined the paths like silver guardians, and flowers from every human colony bloomed in carefully arranged beds. And in the center of it all stood a wall of polished black stone that reflected the sky like a mirror. Thousands of names were inscribed on that wall, humans who had given their lives in service to others. And Marcus led Uravel to a small section near the middle where a single name stood out: Elena Marie Cole, beloved daughter, fierce protector. Forever remembered, Uravel stood before the wall and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been building for months. And she realized that her eyes were burning with an unfamiliar sensation. She was crying for the first time in her very long life. Uravel of the Thessari Dominion was crying, "Commander," Marcus said softly, reaching out to touch her arm. "Are you all right?" Uravel did not answer right away, because she was not sure how to explain what she was feeling. Was not sure she had words for the strange mixture of grief and gratitude and love that was pouring through her. "I never knew her," she said finally, her voice rough with emotion. "I never met her. I never heard her laugh or saw her smile or listened to her argue about justice. And yet I feel as though I have lost someone precious." Marcus squeezed her arm gently. And when she looked at him, she saw that he was crying too. "That is the power of love," he said. "It can connect us to people we have never met. It can make us care about strangers who lived and died before we were born. It can bridge any gap and cross any distance." Uravel thought about this for a long moment. And then she did something that surprised them both. She knelt before the wall, just as she would kneel before the Temple of Ancestors on her homeworld. And she spoke the words of the Thessari warriors blessing "Child of Earth," she said. And her voice carried across the garden like a prayer. "Your courage has been witnessed, your sacrifice has been honored. Your name has been inscribed in the chronicles of those who stand against the darkness, and from this day forward, you will be remembered among the warriors of the Thessari as one who burned with the fire of the truly brave." When she finished, she pressed her hand against the cold stone where Elena's name was inscribed, and she felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. She understood now what Marcus had been trying to tell her all those months ago, when he said that she reminded him of his daughter. He was not insulting her or diminishing her. He was inviting her into his family. He was saying that she had a place in his heart, that she was worthy of the love he gave to those closest to him, that she was not just an ally or a colleague, but something more, something precious. It was the highest honor that a human could bestow upon another being, and Uravel finally understood what it meant to receive it. They stayed at the memorial garden until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. And then they walked together back to the transport that would take them to the station. "Marcus," Uravel said as they walked, "I want to thank you." "For what?" he asked. "For showing me what it means to be strong," she said. "I spent my whole life believing that strength meant standing alone, that it meant needing no one and fearing nothing. But you taught me that true strength comes from connection, from love, from the courage to open your heart, even when you know it might be broken." Marcus smiled, and it was the same smile he had worn at the reception all those months ago, warm and kind and full of a quiet joy. "You taught me something too," he said. "You taught me that Elena's spirit lives on in unexpected places, that her courage and her fire can be found in beings from the other side of the galaxy. And that gives me hope for the future of all our peoples." They walked in silence for a while, and then Uravel spoke again. "I have a request," she said. "Name it," Marcus replied. "When I die," she said, "I would like my name to be inscribed on that wall, next to Elena's, so that we may stand together for all eternity as warriors who fought for what was right." Marcus stopped walking, and when she turned to look at him, she saw that he was crying again, but he was also smiling. A smile so full of love and gratitude that it almost hurt to look at. "I would be honored," he said. "And I know Elena would be too." Uravel nodded, and then she did something that she had never done before. She pulled the human ambassador into an embrace, wrapping her arms around him and holding him close. And she felt his arms wrap around her in return. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing her in me. And thank you for helping me see what I could become." They held each other for a long time. Two beings from different worlds who had found something precious in each other, something that transcended species and culture and all the boundaries that usually kept people apart when they finally let go. Uravel straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Every inch the proud Visari commander that she had always been, but there was something different in her eyes now. Something softer and warmer and infinitely more powerful. Than anything she had possessed before, she had learned the truth. That the humans had always known that love was not a weakness to be hidden away. That grief was not a flaw to be ashamed of. That the bonds between beings, the connections that linked heart to heart across the vast emptiness of space, were the strongest force in the universe. And she would spend the rest of her very long life making sure that everyone else learned it too. In the cycles that followed, Commander Uravel became a legend among both her people and the humans, a bridge between two worlds. A warrior who had discovered a new kind of strength, and whenever anyone asked her why she had devoted herself to humanity's cause, she would say the same thing every time. A human once told me that I reminded him of his daughter. She would say, and I spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that honor. It was, she had discovered, the only thing worth fighting for.